Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really fascinating, maybe even notorious book, Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince.
Yeah, definitely one people have strong opinions about.
For sure. You've probably heard the name, maybe even used Machiavellian to describe someone, probably not as a compliment. But what's really inside this book? Why is it still talked about, centuries later?
Well, that's what we're here to unpack. Our mission today is to uh, sort of demystify the prince for you. We want to cut through the, let's say, the reputation and the jargon and pull out the actual insights. What does it say about leadership, about power, about, well, human nature?
Right. You called it a user manual earlier, which I like. Less abstract philosophy, more practical guide for rulers.
Exactly. Think of it like that. It's drawn from his direct observations of the political world he lived in.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Who was this guy, Niccolò Machiavelli?
Well, he was born in Florence back in 1469. And he wasn't just an armchair theorist. He had a pretty significant diplomatic career working for the Florentine Republic from about 1494 to 1512. Lots of missions, seeing how different courts operated.
So he was in the thick of it.
Absolutely. But then politics happened. The Medici family came back to power in Florence in 1512. Machiavelli, he lost his job. Worse, actually, he was imprisoned, even tortured, because they suspected him of conspiring against them.
Wow, okay, so a dramatic fall from grace.
Big time.
Mm.
After that, he was exiled, sent out to his small farm near Florence. And it was there, in this kind of forced retirement, from around 1512 until he died in 1527, that he wrote The Prince.
So these ideas weren't just academic thoughts, they were like forged in the fire of real politics and personal hardship.
Precisely, and he's very upfront about that. He wrote The Prince, intending it as a practical guide. He even says his goal is to follow up the real truth of the matter than the imagination of it. He wasn't trying to paint a picture of some perfect, ideal world.
He wanted to be useful.
Exactly. To show how things really worked based on his experience and his study of history, how states are actually governed.
Okay, so if it's a user manual, where does he start? What's chapter 1, basically?
He starts with the basic building blocks, the structure of power. He talks about principalities.
Principalities. Okay, what does he mean by that? Just like kingdoms?
Essentially, yeah. Any state or territory ruled by a single leader, a prince. He consciously leaves out republics, states governed by elected bodies because he wrote about them somewhere else. Here, it's all about the single ruler.
Got it. One person in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And he breaks these down into types, right? Let's start with the simplest one.
Right. The first type he mentions is hereditary principalities. These are states where a family has been ruling for a long, long time.
Okay, passed down through generations.
Exactly. And Machiavelli's insight here is, well, it's almost deceptively simple. He says these are the easiest kind to hold on to.
Easiest? Why is that?
Because people are used to the ruling family. There's tradition, there's familiarity. As he puts it, the prince basically just needs to not transgress the customs of his ancestors.
So don't rock the boat too much.
Pretty much. It suggests something fundamental about human nature, right? We often prefer comfort, continuity. Tradition becomes this powerful, almost invisible force holding things together.
Like a well-worn path, you said earlier. People stick to what they know.
Perfect analogy. That familiarity means less resistance, less appetite for risky change. He gives the example of the Duke of Ferrara in Italy, who held his state pretty easily, mainly because his family was long established there.
Okay, so established states have that built-in advantage of tradition. But the real juicy stuff, the really Machiavellian lessons, probably come when someone has to build something new, right?
Absolutely. That's where the real difficulties lie. New principalities, states that are freshly acquired. This is where Machiavelli spends a lot more time, and he breaks these down even further.
Okay, let's get into the subtypes. What's the first one?
The first is when a state is acquired by the ruler's own arms and ability, basically through their own skill and their own forces.
Sounds like the most, admirable way, but also the hardest.
It's definitely hard to acquire it this way. Machiavelli is clear on that, but he says it's actually easier to keep it once you've got it.
Interesting. Why easier to keep?
Because the ruler who takes power this way faces massive hurdles. They're introducing something new, an innovation. People who like the old system will fight hard against it. And the people who might benefit from the new system, they're often only lukewarm defenders, hesitant.
Right, because they haven't seen the benefits yet.
Exactly. It's like building a new house from scratch. It's incredibly hard work. You're constantly battling resistance, maybe the weather, whatever. But once it's built, You know every part of it. The foundations are yours. They're solid. You have real ownership.
Makes sense. So what's the key ingredient for success if you're taking this hard road?
Machiavelli is really blunt here. Vision isn't enough. You need force. He says unarmed prophets always fail. Think Savonarola in Florence? Lots of charisma, lots of followers, but no army. He was ruined.
Ouch.
Yeah. Whereas armed prophets, those who can back up their vision with force, they succeed. A prince must have his own soldiers and allies, loyal troops. He uses Hiero of Syracuse as an example. Rose from nothing, pure ability, faced much trouble in acquiring power, but had little in keeping it afterwards because he built it himself.
Power needs teeth, basically.
That's the message. But then there's the other way to get a new state.
Right, the seemingly easier way, acquired by the arms of others or good fortune, like inheriting it or someone else conquering it for you.
Exactly. Or just sheer luck. This, Machiavelli says, is like flying to the top. Easy to get there.
There's always a but with Machiavelli.
There usually is. But it's incredibly difficult to keep these states. Why? Because your power rests on shaky ground, two most inconstant and unstable things, he calls them. The goodwill and the fortune of whoever put you there.
So you're dependent.
Totally dependent. And often, these princes lack the real know-how, the knowledge requisite to actually command. They haven't learned the hard lessons on the way up, and they usually don't have their own loyal forces.
And this brings us to Cesar Borgia, right? Machiavelli's big case study for this type. He seems fascinated by him.
He really is. Borgia's story is like a masterclass in ruthless pragmatism, but also a warning about luck.
So break it down for us. How did Borgia operate?
Okay, so Borgia got his state, the Romagna region in Italy, mainly thanks to his father, Pope Alexander VI, and French troops, plus some allied Italian families like the Orsini. So, R's of others and fortune.
Step 1, get the state easily.
Right. Step 2, realize those allies and foreign troops are unreliable, even dangerous. So what does he do?
Something ruthless, I'm guessing.
You guessed it. He decided he needed to control his own destiny. First, he brutally gets rid of those unreliable allies. He famously lures their leaders, guys like Vitellozzo Vitelli, Oliverado da Fermo, to a town called Sinigalia, pretends it's a friendly meeting, and has them all killed. Strangled.
Whoa. Okay, that's direct.
Very. That takes care of the external military threat. But then he needs the loyalty of the people in Romagna. The place was apparently a mess, total chaos before him.
So how does he win them over after being, terrifying?
Cleverly, in Machiavelli's view, he appoints this really tough, efficient, maybe too efficient governor, Ramiro d'Orco, to bring order. And d'Orco does it quickly and brutally. Peace is restored.
Okay, so far so good.
But then, once order is established and d'Orco maybe starts getting a bit too powerful or unpopular because of his methods, Borgia does something else. He has d'Orco arrested, tried, and publicly executed. Cut in half in the piazza, actually.
Jeez, why?
To show the people that the past cruelty wasn't his fault, it was this minister's. It makes Borgia seem just, concerned for the people, and it gets rid of a potentially problematic subordinate, all while deflecting any hatred onto the dead guy.
Wow. That is cold-bloodedly strategic.
Extremely. So now he's dealt with allies, pacified the region, gained popular support. He's also working to make himself independent of French power and future popes.
Right.
He's laying strong foundations.
But it didn't last. What went wrong? Fortune.
Exactly. Machiavelli blames extraordinary and extreme malignity of fortune. Just as Borgia is consolidating his power, his father, the Pope, dies unexpectedly. And at the exact same time, Cesar himself gets incredibly sick, almost dies.
Terrible timing.
The worst.
Oh.
It meant he couldn't influence the election of the next pope as effectively as he'd planned, and he ended up supporting the election of Julius II, a cardinal who actually had old grudges against the Borgias. Machiavelli calls this a bad choice.
Why would he do that?
Probably thought he could manage him, or maybe had few other options given his illness. But Machiavelli draws a sharp lesson here. He who believes that new benefits will cause great personages to forget old injuries is deceived.
So old enemies stay enemies.
Pretty much. And sure enough, Pope Julius II quickly moved to dismantle Cesare's power. So even the most capable, ruthless planner can be undone by sheer bad luck, by things totally outside their control.
A powerful reminder. Okay, let's cover the last type of principality he mentions. Mixed principalities. What are those?
These are when you add new territory onto an existing state you already rule, like annexing a neighboring province.
Makes sense. So you're mixing old and new. Is that easier or harder?
It depends. Machiavelli says if the new territory speaks the same language, has similar customs to your old state, it's relatively easy.
What do you do then?
Two key things. First, eliminate the family line of the previous ruler. Just wipe them out so there's no rallying point for rebellion. Second, don't mess with their laws or taxes too much. Keep things familiar. He points to places like Brittany and Burgundy becoming part of France. Similar enough customs made it smoother.
Okay, but what if the new place is totally different? Different language, different customs.
Ah, that's much harder. This is where you really need careful strategy. Machiavelli suggests two main approaches. One, the prince should actually go and live there, at least for a while.
Move in. Why?
So you can see problems develop firsthand and nip them in the bud quickly. It also stops your officials on the ground from getting corrupt and pillaging the place because the boss is watching. He uses the example of the Turkish sultan ruling Greece residing there helped maintain control.
Okay, move there. What's the other option?
Send colonies. Send groups of your own people to live in the new territory.
Why colonies? Not just soldiers.
Colonies are better, he argues. They're cheaper than a big occupying army. They tend to be more loyal because their fortunes are tied to the prince. And crucially, they only displace a small number of the original inhabitants, the ones whose land they take. So you only offend a few scattered people while the rest are left alone and hopefully stay quiet. An army, on the other hand, inconveniences everyone.
Interesting calculation. What about dealing with the neighbors in these mixed situations?
Very important. A prince in a new, different territory should make himself the leader and protector of the weaker neighboring powers. Build alliances with them. At the same time, you need to actively weaken any strong neighbors who could challenge you. And, crucially, prevent any other powerful foreign force from getting a foothold in the region. Don't let another big player onto your turf.
So, play the local powers off against each other. Keep the small ones close. Push back the big ones.
That's the gist. He praises the ancient Romans for doing exactly this when they expanded into Greece. They sent colonies, supported the weaker Greek states, kept the powerful Macedonian kingdom in check, and stopped other empires from interfering. And, importantly, they dealt with problems at once, as soon as they saw them brewing.
And he contrasts this with someone who got it wrong.
Yes. King Louis XII of France when he took Milan in Italy. Machiavelli lays out Louis's 5 errors. Basically, Louis did the opposite of what the Romans did. He wiped out the minor powers who could have been his allies. He made a strong power, the Pope, even stronger. He brought another foreign power, Spain, into Italy. He didn't go live there himself, and he didn't send colonies.
A catalog of mistakes.
Pretty much guaranteed failure, in Machiavelli's view. And he draws a core principle from Louis's failure. Never make a major blunder just to avoid a war right now. Because, he says, you can't actually avoid the war, you just postpone it to your own disadvantage. Deal with threats head-on when you're strong.
Wow. Okay, these are some stark lessons about acquiring and holding territory. Let's shift gears a bit now to the prince himself. What about his personal qualities, his character, his toolkit?
Right. This is where Machiavelli gets really into the nitty-gritty of leadership behavior. And he starts with something foundational, the art of war. He insists, absolutely insists, that a prince ought to have no other aim or thought than war and its rules and discipline. It should be his primary, almost sole focus.
His only job, basically, seems extreme.
It sounds extreme, but for Machiavelli, war, or the credible threat of it, is the ultimate tool of the state. Neglecting military matters, that's the first cause of losing your state. Mastering it, that's how you get power and keep it. He argues that an unarmed ruler will naturally be despised by those who are armed, and you can't expect armed men to willingly obey someone who doesn't understand their craft.
So how should a prince practice this, especially when there isn't a war going on, in peacetime?
2 ways. Action and study. Action means keeping your troops well-drilled, disciplined, but also the prince himself needs to be active. Machiavelli strongly recommends incessantly hunting.
Hunting, like for fun.
Not just for fun. To toughen the body, yes, but more importantly, to learn the landscape. Understand the mountains, the valleys, the rivers, the marshes in your territory. This knowledge is vital, he says, for choosing campsites, planning marches, setting ambushes, conducting battles effectively.
Knowing your terrain.
Absolutely critical. Then there's study. A prince must read histories. Look at the lives of great military leaders, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Scipio. Analyze their campaigns. Why did they win? Why did they lose? Learn from their successes and their failures.
Got it. Any examples he gives?
He mentions Philip Homan, a leader of the Achaean League in ancient Greece. Apparently, even when walking in the countryside with friends during peacetime, Philip Pullman was always thinking about war, constantly posing tactical scenarios. What if the enemy was on that hill? How would we approach them? How would we retreat? War was always on his mind.
Okay, so military readiness is job one. What about other qualities? Being generous, being cruel, keeping promises. This is where he starts to sound really Machiavellian, right?
This is exactly where he challenges conventional morality head-on. He lists the qualities people praise or blame in rulers: generous or stingy, cruel or merciful, trustworthy or treacherous, and so on.
The usual virtues and vices.
Right. And he says, look, it would be great if a prince could have all the good qualities. Wonderful. But, he states bluntly, human conditions do not permit it. You just can't be perfectly good all the time and survive in politics.
So what's the alternative?
The prince must be pragmatic. He needs to know how to do wrong and to make use of it or not according to necessity. The survival and stability of the state are paramount. Sometimes doing what looks like the virtuous thing might actually lead to ruin, while an action that seems like a vice might be what brings security and order.
Okay, let's break that down. What about generosity, or liberality as he calls it, versus being mean or frugal?
His take is counterintuitive to our usual thinking. He argues that trying too hard to be seen as liberal or generous is actually dangerous for a prince.
How so? Isn't generosity good?
If you're constantly giving things away, spending lavishly to maintain that reputation, you'll eventually burn through your own money. Then what? You either become poor and lose respect, or you have to start taxing your people heavily to pay for your generosity.
Which makes people hate you.
Exactly. It makes you odious. So Machiavelli concludes, it's actually much better in the long run to accept a reputation for being mean or frugal. Why? Because if you manage your finances carefully, you'll have the resources you need to defend the state, to undertake projects, all without burdening his people. They might grumble a bit about your stinginess, but they won't hate you for excessive taxes.
Is there a difference if you're spending your own money versus, say, war spoils?
Ah, good point. He does make that distinction. If it's your own wealth or your subjects' money, be thrifty. But if you're distributing money or goods taken from enemies, plunder from a campaign, then you should be very liberal. Give generously to your soldiers. That builds loyalty and morale without costing your treasury. He prints to rulers like Pope Julius II and the King of Spain, known for being quite frugal, who are ultimately very successful.
Okay, frugality over flashy generosity. Now for the really big one, cruelty versus clemency. Being feared versus being loved. What's his famous or infamous conclusion here?
This is probably the most quoted and maybe most misunderstood part of The Prince. He asks the question, is it better to be loved or feared? Ideally, he says, you'd want to be both.
Sure, who wouldn't?
But he continues, because it's very difficult to be both and you often have to choose, it is much safer to be feared than loved.
Safer to be feared? Why? That sounds terrible.
His reasoning is based on his rather dim view of human nature. Men, he says, are generally ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous. Love, in his view, is maintained by a link of obligation. But because men are inherently self-interested, they'll break that link whenever it suits them, whenever they see personal advantage.
Okay, so love is unreliable. What about fear?
Fear, however, is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails. It's constant. It's predictable. People might not like you, but they'll obey you because they fear the consequences if they don't. It's about ensuring stability and control in a world full of untrustworthy people.
But there's a huge caveat here, isn't there? Something people often leave out. It's not about just being a terrifying monster.
Absolute crucial point. He stresses that while you want to be feared, you must, above all, avoid being hated. There's a difference.
How do you manage that?
Right.
Feared but not hated.
The key, he says, is to abstain from the property of your subjects and from their women. Don't seize their land or fortunes. Don't interfere with their families. As long as you don't mess with their basic security and honor, people will generally tolerate your rule even if they fear your power. He makes that incredibly cynical, famous remark. Men forget the death of their father more quickly than the loss of their patrimony.
Wow. Property is sacred.
To avoid hatred, yes. He uses Cesare Borgia again. Borgia's cruelty, like executing Romero d'Orco, actually brought peace and order to Romagna, which Machiavelli argues was ultimately more merciful than the Florentine government, which allowed chaos and destruction in Pistoia because they were afraid of being seen as cruel.
So well-timed, decisive, even harsh action can be better than inaction.
In his view, yes, if it establishes order and security. He also mentions Hannibal, the Carthaginian general. His inhuman cruelty was legendary, But it was also what kept his incredibly diverse army made up of soldiers from many different nations united in discipline during long campaigns against Rome. He contrasts Hannibal with the Roman general Scipio, whose too great forbearance, his leniency, actually led to his armies rebelling in Spain.
So finding that balance between necessary severity and avoiding outright hatred is key. This leads us to keeping promises, right? Keeping faith. And the famous fox and lion thing.
Yes, another classic Machiavellian concept. He starts by acknowledging that, of course, it's praiseworthy for a prince to be honest and keep his word. Everyone agrees on that. But history shows, he says, that the princes who achieved the greatest things were often those who knew how to circumvent the intellect of men by craft, those who weren't overly concerned with keeping their promises when it didn't suit them.
So break your word if you need to.
He frames it using an analogy. There are two ways of fighting: by law, which is human, and by force, which is beastly. Since law often isn't enough, a prince must learn to use the beastly way too. He says this is why ancient myths had heroes tutored by Chiron the centaur, half-man, half-beast, symbolizing the need for both natures.
Okay, so what kind of beast should the prince imitate?
He must choose two, the fox and the lion. Why? Because the lion, for all his strength, can't see traps or snares. The fox, while clever at avoiding traps, isn't strong enough to fight off wolves.
So you need both.
Exactly. You need to be a fox to discover the snares and a lion to terrify the wolves. You need the cunning to recognize deception and the strength to crush opposition. Therefore, a wise prince cannot, nor ought he to, keep faith when such observance may be turned against him.
Why not?
Again, it comes back to human nature. Because men themselves are bad and will not keep faith with you, you are under no obligation to keep faith with them if it harms you or the state. It's a matter of self-preservation in a treacherous world.
This sounds like it's all about appearance versus reality then.
Very much so. Machiavelli is quite explicit about this. He says it's unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is very necessary to appear to have them.
Fake it till you make it. Or just fake it.
More like Fursel. Project the image convincingly. Appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, upright. Seem to possess these virtues. But crucially, keep your mind prepared to change to the opposite instantly if necessity requires it. If you need to be cruel or deceptive to save the state, you do it.
Why is the appearance so important?
Because, he argues, most people judge based on what they see, not what they know firsthand. Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. The vulgar, the common people, are always taken by what a thing seems to be and by what comes of it. Results and appearances matter more than intentions or true character in politics.
So it all circles back to that main goal. Avoid being despised and hated. How does a prince really nail that down?
Well, the big things we mentioned. Don't take property, don't touch the women. That avoids hatred. To avoid contempt, being seen as weak or worthless, a prince needs to actively avoid appearing fickle, frivolous, effeminate, mean-spirited, irresolute. Instead, project the opposite: greatness, courage, gravity, and fortitude. Make your decisions seem final and authoritative.
And this helps protect against conspiracies, too.
Definitely. Machiavelli believes the best defense against internal plots is simply not being hated or despised by the general population. Why? Because conspirators usually count on popular support, or at least popular indifference, after they strike. If they know the people actually like the prince, or at least respect him and hate the idea of chaos, they'll lose their nerve. The risk is too high.
He has an example for that, too, right?
Yeah, Messer Annibale Bentivogli, a ruler in Bologna. He was murdered by rivals. But the people of Bologna were apparently loyal to the Bentivogli family. They rose up, killed the conspirators, and even went all the way to Florence to find a distant relative who was thought to be the illegitimate son of the previous prince to come back and rule them until Annibale's actual son was old enough. That's goodwill saving a dynasty.
Wow, that's powerful popular support.
Yeah.
How does this play into managing the nobles versus the common people? Does a prince need to treat them differently?
Yes, very much so. Machiavelli notes that in his time, unlike perhaps Roman times, it was generally more necessary to satisfy the people rather than the soldiers or the nobles. There were exceptions, like the Turkish Sultan or the Sultan of Egypt, whose power depended entirely on their armies. But for most European princes, keeping the people happy was more critical.
Well, it's just because there are more of them.
Partly. But also because a prince can create and destroy nobles, easily great titles take them away. But you can't just replace the entire population. The people are a more constant factor. The best approach: protect the people from being oppressed by the nobles. If the people feel safe from the powerful lords under the prince's rule, they'll be loyal.
And should the prince handle the messy business himself?
Smart move, Machiavelli says, is to delegate. Leave affairs of reproach, things that might cause resentment, like punishments or unpopular decisions, to the management of others. But keep those of grace, like rewards and favors, in their own hands. Let your ministers take the blame while you take the credit.
Clever. One last thing in this toolkit section. Fortresses. Good idea or bad idea?
It depends, is Machiavelli's answer. Fortresses can be useful or they can be harmful. It depends entirely on the circumstances.
What's the deciding factor?
Who do you fear more? If you're more afraid of your own people rising up against you, then yes, build fortresses to protect yourself from them. But if you're more worried about foreign enemies attacking you, fortresses might not be the best investment, or could even be counterproductive if captured.
So what's the ultimate fortress then?
His conclusion is clear. The best fortress is not to be hated by the people. If your people hate you, no fortress will save you in the long run, because if they rise up, they'll find allies. Foreign powers will happily help a population overthrow a hated ruler. He uses the Countess of Forli as an example. Her fortress let her withstand an initial popular uprising after her husband was killed. But when Caesar Borgia attacked later, backed by the French, the people sided with Borgia and the fortress was useless.
Yeah.
People's loyalty trumps stone walls.
Fascinating. Okay, we've covered the principles, the theory. Let's look at a real-world example Machiavelli himself wrote about. Castruccio Castracani. Who was he, and why did Machiavelli focus on him?
Right. Machiavelli actually wrote a separate short biography, The Life of Castruccio Castracani of Lucca. He presents Castruccio as this almost perfect example of a new prince who acquired power through his own ability in arms, not through luck or inheritance. Castruccio rose from relatively humble beginnings in the early 14th century to become the powerful lord of Lucca, Pisa, and other areas in Tuscany.
So, a self-made prince. What specific abilities did he show that aligned with Machiavelli's ideas?
Several. First, military genius. Machiavelli details his strategic brilliance. For instance, in the Battle of Monte Carlo against the Florentines, Castruccio noticed they had put our best troops in the center and weaker ones on the wings. He did the opposite, put his best on the wings. He had his center advance slowly while his strong wings hit the weaker Florentine flanks hard, causing a total collapse. That shows analysis, adaptation, knowing how to use his forces.
So the lion aspect was strong. What about the fox? Was he cunning?
Oh, absolutely. Machiavelli recounts how Castruccio gained control of the city of Pistoia. It was torn by internal factions. He promised help to both sides, got his troops inside, and then systematically eliminated the leaders of both factions and took over himself. Classic Machiavellian deception and exploitation of division.
Ruthless too, I imagine.
Definitely pragmatic and ruthless when needed. Early in his career in Lucca, he was helped by a powerful family, the Poggios. But later, Machiavelli says Castruccio decided they were untrustworthy and potentially rivals, so he had them killed or exiled. He found by experience that none of them were to be trusted. For Castruccio, securing his power and his state justified breaking old loyalties if they became a threat.
Sounds like he lived by his own rules. Did he have any memorable sayings that capture this philosophy?
Machiavelli includes several sharp, often cynical maxims attributed to Castruccio. One is, it was the victory that brought the glory, not the methods of achieving it. Pure Machiavellian ends justify the means thinking.
Anything else?
He also reportedly said, men ought to attempt everything and fear nothing, that God is a lover of strong men, because one always sees that the weak are chastised by the strong. And when criticized for killing an old friend who had helped him rise, he supposedly replied that people deceived themselves, he had only killed a new enemy. It shows that cold calculation alliances shift. Yesterday's friend can be today's obstacle.
Chilling stuff. But even Castruccio, this paragon of ability, couldn't control everything, right? What about fortune?
No, and that's a crucial part of the story for Machiavelli. Despite all his brilliance, all his success built on his own merits, Castruccio's career was cut short by pure chance. After winning a major victory near Florence, he exerted himself directing repairs and greeting returning troops, caught a chill standing in a cold wind over the Arno River, developed a fever, and died suddenly.
Just like that. Bad luck.
Exactly. Machiavelli explicitly says, fortune struck him down just at the time when she should have preserved it and thus ruined all those plans he had for further expansion. It perfectly illustrates Machiavelli's point that maybe half of life is fortuna, random chance, that can override even the greatest virtue or ability.
Did Castruccio have any last words of wisdom, according to Machiavelli?
Yes, his supposed dying counsel to Pagolo Guniji, his chosen heir, who wasn't his biological son, is very revealing. He basically tells Pagolo, look, I built this large state through my own efforts and constant warfare. You're inheriting it through luck. You won't be able to hold it all the way I did. Be realistic, consolidate what you can, make peace with Florence, our main enemy, focus on keeping Lucca and Pisa, adapt to your different circumstances. It highlights the need to adjust methods based on the situation and your own capabilities, not just blindly copy a predecessor.
That really brings together the themes of ability, fortune, and adaptation. Which leads us nicely into Machiavelli's final thoughts on this balance between fortune and human action. Uses some analogies here too, doesn't he?
He does. He comes back to that idea of foresight, of dealing with problems early. He compares political troubles to hectic fever. In the beginning, it's easy to cure, but hard to diagnose. Later on, it's easy to diagnose, but almost impossible to cure. So, a wise ruler, like a good doctor, needs to recognize dangers when they are small and manageable and act at once. Don't wait until the fever is raging.
Proactive versus reactive.
Exactly. And then there's his most famous analogy for fortune itself.
The raging river.
That's the one. He says fortune is like a raging river that floods plains, tears down trees and buildings. When it's flooding, you can't do much. But, he argues, that doesn't mean we're helpless. When the weather is calm, people can build defenses and barriers, dikes, canals, so that when the river does flood again, the damage is lessened, or the water is channeled safely.
So we can prepare.
Yes. Fortune, he estimates, might control one half of our actions, but the other half, or maybe even more, is left to us, to our free will, our foresight, our ability to prepare and respond. It's a call to agency, not despair. We can build those defenses against bad luck.
And part of that preparation is being able to adapt your approach based on the circumstances.
Absolutely critical. Success, Machiavelli observes, often depends on whether a ruler's way of acting conforms to the spirit of the times. Sometimes caution is needed, sometimes boldness. The problem is, people tend to have one natural style. A cautious man might succeed when caution is required, but he'll be ruined when times demand quick, decisive action, and vice versa for an impetuous man.
Can anyone actually change their style like that?
Machiavelli seems skeptical that people can fundamentally change their nature easily. He uses Pope Julius II as an example again. Julius was known for being incredibly impetuous, always acting boldly and quickly, and it worked for him. His bold moves consistently brought success because, Machiavelli suggests, the circumstances of his time favored that approach. But he adds, if Julius had lived longer and faced times that required caution, he probably would have failed because he likely couldn't have changed his ingrained impetuous nature.
So luck plays a role even in whether your personality fits the times.
It seems so. It's a complex interplay. And finally, how does Machiavelli wrap up The Prince? It's not just dry analysis at the end, is it? No, the final chapter is quite different. It's a passionate exhortation to liberate Italy from the barbarians, meaning the foreign powers like France and Spain that dominated the peninsula. He calls for a new Italian prince, maybe one from the Medici family, to whom the book is dedicated, to rise up, using the lessons outlined in the book, create their own forces, adapt military tactics, and unify Italy, driving out the foreigners.
So it ends with a call to action.
Very much so. He quotes Livy, saying that war is just which is necessary, and arms are hallowed when there is no other hope in them. It blends all his pragmatic, often harsh political advice with this powerful, patriotic vision for his homeland. It's like he's saying, here are the tools, now someone go use them for this great purpose.
What a journey indeed. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, from the types of states to the fox and the lion to Cesare Borgia and Castruccio Castracani and the role of fortune. Let's try to boil down some of the absolute key takeaways from this deep dive into The Prince.
Sounds good. Well, first, I'd say The Prince is fundamentally a practical guide. It prioritizes what works in the real world to gain and maintain power, often setting aside traditional morality to focus on effectiveness and stability. Pragmatism first.
Right. And second, the type of state you're dealing with really matters. Hereditary ones are easiest because of tradition. New ones are tough, especially if you inherit them or get them through luck. The most stable, though hard one, are those built on the ruler's own ability and, crucially, own arms.
Yes, that point about own forces is huge for him. Relying on mercenaries or other people's troops is a massive mistake. You need soldiers loyal only to you. Fourth takeaway. A ruler has to be flexible, knowing when to be good and when, out of necessity, how to do wrong for the sake of the state. But the ultimate goal is always to avoid the people's hatred.
Which leads to the fifth point. It's safer to be feared than loved if you have to choose. But fear must not turn into hatred. And the best way to avoid hatred: respect people's property and their families. Don't mess with their core security.
Exactly. And sixth, adaptability and cunning, the fox and the lion, are essential. You need both strength and cleverness. And often, the appearance of virtue, seeming to be good, faithful, merciful, is more politically effective than actually being all those things rigidly, especially when hard choices are needed.
Got it. And finally, maybe seventh, fortune. Luck plays a massive role, maybe half the game. But human ability, foresight, preparation, building those river defenses allows a smart ruler to mitigate bad luck and perhaps shape the other half. You have agency.
Well summarized, and I think these insights, even though they come from 16th century Italy, still make you think, don't they? They raise uncomfortable questions about leadership, about power dynamics, about human behavior that are still relevant in, well, almost any field today. They force you to look at the mechanics of influence, maybe in a less idealized way.
Absolutely, they definitely challenge you. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. If, as Machiavelli argues, leaders are sometimes forced by necessity to act against traditional virtues like honesty or mercy for the sake of the state's survival or well-being, what then is the ultimate responsibility of a ruler to their people? Is it just about maintaining power and order, or is there something more?
A heavy question to ponder.
Indeed. Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Machiavelli's The Prince.